everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ashley and today I'm going to be talking about my top 21 books of 2021. I read over 100 books this year and I read quite a few that I really enjoyed, so it wasn't too hard to put together 21 of my top picks for the year. It's about a fifth of my reading, so 1 in every 5 was a rock star, 5 or 4-star read that I really enjoyed. And I'm going to be going through my top picks today. I'm going to be going by genre because I do tend to read quite a few different genres, and so I'll categorize them in genre with the timestamps and chapters so you can skip around if there's certain genres you're more interested in than others. But I'm going to start with the ones that I tend to read the most of, and that is going to be my favorite thriller books of the year. Most of my favorite thrillers this year are pretty controversial picks. They're ones that a lot of people didn't really enjoy. But this year, I feel like I was taking thrillers a little bit less seriously and just trying to have fun with them. And so I was able to enjoy them a little bit more and look past some of the cheesiness. And then after I heard reviews about them, I was like, oh gosh, yeah, no, those books weren't great. But they were a fun time for me. So I'll go over the first couple of those, but just know they may not be very universally enjoyed and they definitely have flaws. I just had fun because they're very fast to read and gave me a good reading experience. And so the first one is probably the most controversial one, and that is Every Value Break by Peter Swanson. This is a story about this woman who's getting ready to be married to this man, and she's having a little bit of doubts about it. He's like good on paper, but she doesn't know if he's the right fit for her. And then when she goes on her bachelorette trip, she ends up having a one-night stand with a stranger, but she decides to brush past it. She's still gonna get married, act like it never happened. It was just the last fling before the ring for her. So then she gets married, and then when they go on their honeymoon, that man she had an affair with shows up on the honeymoon and is like convinced that they're in love and they're made for each other, and it causes her many problems. She has to navigate that, figure out what decisions she wants to make, lie to people, not know who to trust, and it all just becomes a giant shit show. I previously haven't liked other books from Peter Swanson, but this one just read very different. It was very fast-paced, didn't feel like it took itself too seriously. I also listened to this one on an audiobook, which I feel like heightened the experience, and I listened to it all in, I believe, one day. So if you're gonna read this book, that's how I suggest you pick it up. Just fly through it. It's just a fun coastal thriller. There's plenty of twists and turns, and it definitely has a lot of not knowing who to trust, which is one of my favorite things in thrillers, which is why I enjoyed it so much, because you're like, okay, should I trust this person, or are they lying? Or are they lying? Or are they both lying? Or is everybody lying? Or is nobody lying? Is our main character even reliable? And I just really like when you just don't know who to trust in a thriller book. So that's why I had fun with it, but I do understand it's not like the most beautifully crafted story. Another thriller that is very hit or miss for people is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. This is a sort of dark academia thriller where you're following this woman whose niece goes to this college, and her niece calls her up and says, people keep dying. I think this professor might be in on it. Can you come help? And so she comes to the college to come help investigate. Saying that out loud, it sounds like a very strange premise, but it just kind of makes sense once you get into the book. This professor is a guy who teaches Greek mythology, and he has this like cult of college women who are obsessed with him, and they call themselves the Maidens. And so he's got this very weird vibe going on. These girls keep going missing, getting killed, and the aunt is like trying to help figure out what's going on there. She also leads group therapy, so she has some sort of psychological background, and she also is going through quite a bit of grief and trauma herself from the loss of her husband. That is also shaping into the story. I don't know, I just thought this one was fun. It was really fast paced. The chapters were short. It was easy to get through. I liked the atmosphere of the college setting with a little bit of Greek mythology weaved in. I also just really like thrillers that deal with grief in any sort of way. I feel like that always just adds a really interesting morose element that I enjoy, and so I liked that aspect of the story. The ending is a little bit wild, the plot twist. Some parts are guessable, other parts are a little bit less guessable. Overall, it's just kind of a crazy wild time. I think you're either gonna love it or hate it. I personally didn't like The Silent Patient, Alex Michaelides' first book, but then I did like The Maidens, and it seems like if you did like The Silent Patient, you probably won't like The Maidens. So a little bit of a toss up there, but I had fun with it. And then the other thriller on my list that is pretty hit or miss for people is 56 Days by Catherine Ryan Howard. This is the COVID thriller that came out this year. At first, when I heard a COVID thriller was coming out, I was not interested at all, but then the closer it got to its published date, felt like it could potentially be interesting, and I decided to pick it up, and I flew through this one and I had so much fun with it. The concept of this one is that this man and this woman meet and they start dating right before the lockdown happens in Ireland because of COVID-19. And then when the lockdown happens, they're like, why don't we move in with each other for like this 2-week period? If we're gonna be locked down anyway, why don't we be locked down together? A crazy idea, but I don't know. Like, whatever, just go with it. It makes sense. And so that happened 56 days ago. And when the book begins, you know that someone in that apartment has ended up dead. And you're like jumping around in different points in time from them meeting to moving in together to the part where someone ends up dead. I just thought it was a lot of fun. I really liked the way the timeline was played with. It didn't go just in chronological order, so you're like piecing things together at interesting times. You're learning things about each character and their history and their motives and the secrets they both have, and you really don't know who to trust at times. So I had a lot of fun with this one. The people who don't like it, I feel like they tend to lean more around like a 3-star rating for this one rather than full out hating it. So maybe a safer controversial pick, but yeah, I don't know. I just had fun with it. I just wasn't taking thrillers as serious this year. If I was flying through a book and intrigued enough, then that was a good time for me. I still have a couple other thrillers on my list, but these are a little less polarizing. The first one is an older thriller, but I read it this year, and that is Behind Her Eyes by Sarah Pinborough. I feel like I've talked about this book a couple times throughout the year. It's come up in a couple videos, so I don't feel like I need to spend a ton of time with it. Also, it is older, so I feel like more people know this one, but it's basically just set up like a domestic thriller where this woman ends up meeting this man in a bar. They have a nice little night full of chemistry and a kiss, and then the next morning when she goes into work, she discovers that he is her new boss, and also he is married. And then she just ends up getting in a whirlwind of trouble, getting too invested and obsessed in their marriage, in both of them, and crazy things happen from there. The best part of this one is the plot twist at the end. It is a very big plot twist. It is a very surprising plot twist, and it is not something that you see done in thrillers a lot. So that is how it was marketed when it was first coming out several years ago, was like, oh my god, you're not gonna believe this ending. And that held very true for me. I really enjoyed the reading experience. It had me guessing the whole time. I also liked knowing that the ending was going to be something surprising, because the whole time I'm like trying to piece it together in my mind, like, oh my god, what could be happening? What could be so surprising? And it still shocked me when I got to that reveal, which is really nice, because sometimes if I overhype something in my brain, I will end up disappointed. But this one really like followed through with the promise that the ending was going to be crazy. And the reason I read this year was because it was also adapted into a TV show on Netflix, and I really enjoyed the show as well. So I'd recommend checking out both if you haven't yet. Next up, we have Rock, Paper, Scissors by Alice Feeney. This was my first Alice Feeney book, and I absolutely loved it. I read it so fast. I loved the atmosphere, the characters, not knowing who to trust. That's a common element in the thrillers that I enjoy. And I definitely want to be picking up more of Alice Feeney's backlist and the stuff that she comes out with in the future, because I could definitely see her being a new favorite thriller author. But this is a story about this couple who they're in a rocky part of their marriage, and so they're going off to this cabin in the middle of the snowy woods that they won a giveaway trip for, and using it as an opportunity to potentially resolve issues in their marriage. Or are they? Because it seems like one of them may not be getting out alive once you see what's going on in the story. That's really all I want to say about it. I think this one is just full of surprises and really fun, and I just loved getting to know the secrets the characters had. And there's a huge plot twist that comes into this one as well that's really fun and exciting. It had me turning my gears in my brain the whole time trying to piece together how it was going to end, and I still didn't fully guess it. So I love when I can just be surprised with a thriller. It also has a nice spooky snowy atmosphere and another character who gets thrown into the mix that's pretty spooky. So this one just was really fun. It had great vibes. It was super fast paced, and I could not put it down. So highly recommend this one. The next thriller on my list is Who is Maud Dixon by Alexandra Andrews. This is a story about this woman who gets the opportunity to work with this very famous author named Maud Dixon. Maud Dixon is a pen name they write under, and nobody knows who Maud Dixon really is, but they're hugely successful, and they've built up this kind of mystery around them as an author. So this woman's really excited to get the opportunity to go work with her. She works in the publishing world herself, and she's excited about this move for her career. It's kind of gonna suck because she's not gonna be able to tell anyone about it. She has to sign an NDA because there's all this mystery around who Maud Dixon is, but it's also a super cool opportunity. And then from there, chaos ensues as she begins to learn who Maud Dixon is, and just the journey this woman takes her on is just absolutely insane and so much fun. It's definitely one of those like runaway train type thrillers, which I find super fun. And I think this one is best enjoyed if you don't really read the synopsis and you don't know much about it, because I feel like the synopsis gives a little bit too much away about the story. And I'm glad that I didn't fully read the synopsis when I read the book for the first time, because it is a little bit slow in the beginning. And it takes a pretty long time for everything to happen in the book that is mentioned in the synopsis, but then still crazy plot twist stuff happens after that. But even then, I think it's more fun to just not know know what journey you're getting ready to be taken on with this character. So I would suggest not really reading too much into the synopsis. If this one sounds interesting to you, I would just say pick it up and you'll probably have as good of a time as I did with it. And then the last thriller on my list is a YA thriller, and that is The Girls I've Been by Tess Sharp. This is a bank heist thriller. It follows this girl who has recently broken up with her boyfriend, and now she's dating a new girl. But the boyfriend didn't know she was dating this new girl, who was also their friend, until the night prior when they had some kind of event. And now all three of them have to go to the bank together to deposit the check for all the money they raised at this fundraising event. And it's super awkward and uncomfortable because he's like upset that she didn't tell him that she's already dating this new girl that was their friend. It's just like an awkward situation, weird like love triangle stuff going on. And then while they're at the bank gets held up, and then they're all stuck there together hoping to survive this bank heist. This one's a lot of fun because the main character has a very interesting past where she has been a lot of different girls. She's used a lot of different names, lived a very con artist type life in her past, and she is able to use those skills to help them try to get out of this situation. So I think this one was just great. It was a lot of fun. I love the characters, I love the tension, I love the action, and I don't hear people talking about this one enough. So I definitely wanted to include it on my list, and I would definitely recommend that you pick it up if you like YA thrillers. Next up, we can move on to my favorite horror books of the year, and I have quite a few, and many of them are very different because I read a lot of different styles of horror. The first one is a novella that I read pretty early in the year and I talked about quite a bit, and that is Night of the Mannequins by Stephen Graham Jones. In this story, there is a mannequin that may or may not have come to life to fulfill a revenge mission against a group of teenagers who had previously played with that mannequin and used it to play pranks on their friends. It's super short and super fast paced, so you really don't need to know more than that. I just really love Stephen Graham Jones novellas. I feel like he is just a master of the short form horror. It's always so engaging. Interesting psychological elements are always infused through the ones that I've read, and I just had such a fun time with it. It was such a surprise to pick it up and see what the story was because it wasn't really what I was expecting, but I still had so much fun with it, and it was an immediate 5-star read, and I highly recommend this one to people who love a good horror novella. Next up, another horror novella I read this year and absolutely loved is Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. This one is very disturbing. You may have seen it be talked about as a disturbing horror novella, and it is definitely that. So if you don't like super disturbing horror, then I would not recommend this one for you. But if you're okay with reading some of that, I think this one was executed super well. It's about these two women who meet on the internet in the early 2000s. One of them is trying to sell an apple peeler and the other one is interested in buying. And then the whole story takes place through instant messages and emails between the two of them, and it follows the very weird relationship they end up in with a very uneven power dynamic. And that's all I'm gonna say. I'm gonna let you be surprised by the rest because it is truly so engrossing. It is just something you can't stop looking away from. And I think what makes this book so successful is the format that it's in, that you're reading the instant messages and the emails, because it feels like you're reading something that you shouldn't be reading, but then you can't stop reading it, and it is just so crazy. It feels so real, and it's so disturbing, and it's so good, and I so very highly recommend this one if you like disturbing horror, that is. The next horror book I have to talk about is Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. This is quite a long horror novel, coming in around 500 pages, and I don't always love long form horror, so I was kind of skeptical of this one, but I actually ended up really enjoying it. In this story, you're following a man, his wife, and his teenage son who are all moving back to his hometown where he grew up, and they're moving back into the house he grew up in with his abusive father. Once they get there, the vibes are just off. The son ends up meeting this kid who's very dark and creepy and weird. The whole vibes in the town are just weird. It's kind of like a dark haunted town vibe, and then the story ends up including some sci-fi elements. It's not totally realistic, which is super fun. I know this book hasn't been everyone's cup of tea because it is super long, and I feel like the first half is a little slow, but it definitely changes quite a bit at the halfway mark, and then the reveals you get are super interesting, and I just found it really compelling. I thought it was done really well. I really liked the way the characters were built up. I love following families in horror. I think that's really fun. Instead of just following one character, following the parents and the teenage kid, just the different issues they face from their different perspectives in life, I find to be really interesting. So that's probably why this one worked so well for me. But also the sci-fi element I thought was super cool and a really interesting kind of horror sci-fi fusion that just worked really well for me, and I do highly recommend this one. The next one that I have to talk about is classified as horror often, but it's not like in your face horror. It's more just like a surreal literary fiction type story. So I'm not really sure why it gets classified as horror other than the author tends to write horror. But that is The House at the Bottom of the Lake by Josh Malerman. This is a story about these two teenage kids who are going out on this little lake for their first date. And when they go out on a lake, they end up going really far away to a lake that's connected to the lake that's connected to the lake. And they end up finding a house at the bottom of the lake, submerged under the lake. And the story follows them over the course of the summer as they keep going back out to this house and exploring it. They get scuba gear and they take turns going down there and check out what's going on. It is a bit creepy because the house is in like perfect condition. Nothing's floating in weird ways. It's very much just like you're in a normal house, but you're also just happen to be at the bottom of a lake. And I thought this book was just so well done. It's not super in your face. It's not super heavy handed. It's very much just a story where you're following these two teenagers discovering themselves and each other and love for the first time, as well as this very strange phenomenon that's happening at the bottom of their lake, and just going with it, not asking too many questions, just exploring it together, seeing how it goes. So I really enjoyed this book. I feel like it very much fit my weird taste in books, where I like things that are very realistic but with a little bit of the weird dial kind of turned up. There's like just something that's slightly off, and so that's why this really worked well for me. I know that's probably not going to work well for everyone. I feel like this book's pretty polarizing, but if that sounds like something that you might like, I would definitely recommend it because I really enjoyed it. The next book I have to talk about is more of a mystery, very much more so a mystery, but it has some horror elements, and this is the only mystery I have on the list, so I feel like it just makes sense to group it with the horror book. But that is The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. So far, Stuart Turton has not missed for me. I have given both of the books that I've read from him 5 stars, absolutely love them, and I cannot wait to keep reading more from him. In this story, it feels super classic. It just feels like a classic mystery. It's set in, I think, the 1600s, very far back in time, and you're following this detective and his bodyguard. The detective is being held captive. You don't know what he's in trouble for, but they're all getting ready to board this ship together. Right before they get on the ship to travel to wherever he's going to be sentenced for whatever he did, this man starts screaming and lights this thing on fire and talks about how he thinks there is a devil or a dark force on the ship and they should not get on it. Despite that, he doesn't really have a choice. He's being held captive. They still get on the boat, and then once they depart, really spooky, creepy things start happening, and it seems like there may be a dark force on the boat with them. The detective would investigate it, but he's being held captive, so there's not much he can do. And so in this one, the main character is the bodyguard. The detective is very much like a Sherlock type character, and the bodyguard is like a badass Watson, I guess. And so you're following him investigate what's going on the ship and trying to get to the bottom of the mystery and figuring out if it's something paranormal going on or something with a real life explanation. You're also learning so much about so many different interesting characters and their past and how certain people are connected. And I just think it is such a compelling mystery. It is so rich in atmosphere, so well done. I just love that teetering line of is it paranormal or is it not? I love the classic mystery vibes in it, and I also love that it's historical without getting too caught up in the details and that bogging down the story. If that throws you off, I would not worry about that element, because I also don't really like to read historical stuff like set in the 1700s. I'm like, ooh, probably not for me. But this one, it does not bog down the story at all. It's just kind of like the backdrop of the story and creates a lot of the atmosphere, but otherwise the mystery is front and center, and it is so good. So definitely very highly recommend this one. And lastly, I have a couple YA horror books to recommend, and the first one is What Big Teeth by Rose Zabot. I will say I do not think this is going to be a book for everyone. I do not see many people read or talk about this book, and I think it has a very particular audience, so I don't think it's going to work for everyone. But it is a story where you're following this teenage girl who is just getting kicked out of her boarding school, and she is moving back in with her family, which includes her grandma, her mom, her dad, her cousins and siblings. It's a full house. house, and they are all monstrous in some way. As the cover hints, there's some werewolf vibes, but there's also some other things going on in the family, especially for a weird visitor that's like the accountant of the family and comes and visits sometimes. So this book just has such weird, monstrous family vibes that you don't really know what's going on, but you're following the teenage girl as she's coming back to her family, and she doesn't remember a lot about her upbringing or why she ever got sent off to boarding school in the first place. There was some kind of incident that happened, but she doesn't remember all the details, and you're just kind of with her as she's figuring out what is going on with this weird family of hers. And I just loved it. It was just the perfect amount of weirdness for me. It's hard to compare this book to anything else because it doesn't really remind me of anything else. It's kind of just its own thing. The closest things I compare it to is The Addams Family and Dark Shadows, but otherwise it's just such an interesting, unique book, and I just found it to be a lot of fun. If you don't like that kind of weird stuff or YA sort of angsty vibes, then you might not like it, but I didn't want to not mention it because I did love this book, and it was definitely one of my top favorites of the year. The next book is The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. This is a Frankenstein retelling that follows Elizabeth, the wife of Frankenstein, and it doesn't follow the story to a T. I haven't read Frankenstein, so I don't know even what the story to a T is, but I do know this takes its own creative license with the story, and you're following her as she moves in with Victor's family as a child. She ends up getting taken in by them to be his sort of friend and playmate. They grow up together, and then he ends up going off to university, and then he kind of goes missing, and she's really concerned about that. She wants to find him because she really wants to marry him and secure her future. That's really the only path she sees for herself. So she goes off trying to find him, and then she starts getting wind of the monster that he has become. I absolutely loved this book. I think it had such great atmosphere. I think it had great characters, and I really just love the way it explored the uneven power dynamic in their relationship, and how Elizabeth just grew as a character was just so interesting with where she started and what she had to do as a young girl in this Victorian time to secure her future. It was just really interesting to watch her face challenges and figure out what to do about the monstrous things he was doing, which I'm sure you can guess if you're familiar with Frankenstein, and just the journey she went on from being in a sort of abusive relationship with uneven power dynamic. I highly recommend this one to people who really liked A Dowry of Blood. In that story, you're following Dracula's bride and the abusive relationship that went on there. So this one, kind of the same, but Frankenstein, but I actually like this one better. I think this one does the story even better. It was more compelling and engaging to me. A Dowry of Blood feels a little bit like vignettes to me, whereas this felt like a more fully fleshed out story. So if you are left feeling unsatisfied with A Dowry of Blood, I would recommend that you pick this one up and give it a try. It is categorized as YA, but I don't know. It just reads more adult to me. So don't worry about like teenage characters with angst in this one. It's not like that at all. It just very much reads more like an adult book. And the last YA horror book I have to talk about is The Dead in the Dark by Courtney Gould. In this story, you're following your main character, Logan, who is the daughter of these two guys who are paranormal investigators, and they have a ghost show, TV show together where they go travel to different places and investigate ghosts. She is their daughter, and now they are all three of them moving back to the dad's hometown in Snakebite, Oregon, where there's something nefarious going on. In this town, teens are going missing, and it seems like there is a dark force and some ghosts at play, and so the dads are investigating that, but Logan is also taking matters into her own hands as she begins meeting people in the town, particularly this girl named Ashley, whose boyfriend was the first one to go missing in the town, and things get complicated when she starts having feelings for Ashley, and a sapphic relationship may or may not ensue in this one too. I had so much fun with this one. I just think it is so well done for a YA horror story. I loved the ghost elements and the characters and the coming of age and the romance elements, and the dads are just interesting characters too, since there are these ghost hunters. There's a lot of secrets in this one. It's basically just unraveling everyone's secrets and trying to piece together the mystery of what's been going on. But all around, I found this to be a super solid YA horror book, and I think this may be this author's debut, so I'm super excited to see what they do in the future. Next up, we can talk about my favorite fantasy books of the year. first one is a fantasy book that bridges a little bit on the lines of horror. So since we just talked about the horror books, I'll talk about this one first, and that is Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Seanan McGuire. This is the second book in the Wayward Children series, which I started this year and I'm absolutely adoring. But out of the first two books, this one has definitely been my favorite so far. This one also is a bit of a prequel to the second book, so there's no spoilers here. There's nothing you need to know from the first book to understand this one. I would recommend reading them in order though, but for the sake of this video, you're not going to get any spoilers. In this story, you're following these two sisters named Jack and Jill, and you follow their story of what happens to them when they go through their portal world and end up in this really spooky, creepy world. Once they get there, they end up getting pulled on their separate ways and go in these separate journeys, and there's very much a lot of Frankenstein and Dracula vibes throughout the story, and it's just so good. It's so good and fun and spooky and creepy, and just has the perfect like Seanan McGuire style throughout. I really love this one. I can't imagine another book becoming my favorite in this series and beating this one because of how much I enjoyed this one. But I don't know, it's a challenge I'm willing to explore because I definitely want to keep reading the rest of the books in these series. They're all like these portal fantasy stories following what happens to these children who end up going through these portals, and then sometimes they get sent back to the real world and they have to cope with that and don't know how to handle it. But yeah, I've just been loving these books and I'm very excited to continue in the rest of the series next year. The next fantasy I have to talk about is a novella that is the beginning of a series, and that is A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow. In the story, you're following a girl named Zinnia Gray who has a chronic condition that a couple other teens in her world have, but basically no one's ever lived past the age of 21. And when you meet her in the story, she is just approaching her 21st birthday, and it is a little bit grim because she suspects, and doctors suspect, that she is not going to live much longer. So because of this, her friend decides to throw her a nice little birthday time so they can celebrate, have a good time. They go to this tower in the town and there are lots of roses. They're just having a good little party. And then she ends up pricking her finger on a spindle. And when she does that, she gets sent into a different world. This is a Sleeping Beauty retelling if you haven't caught that yet. And she ends up encountering this princess in another world who is a different version of a Sleeping Beauty. This princess is fated to marry this guy that she really doesn't want to marry. And so the two of them kind of team up without choice now that Zinnia has just been sent to this world, and try to help each other out and figure out a way to help them escape their own fates. This novella was so fun and fast-paced and just packed a really good punch in just like 100 pages or so. I really loved the characters. They were very quirky and very fun. They very much remind me of the type of characters that Seanan McGuire creates, so I think if you like especially the Wayward Children series that you would like this as well. So far this is the only book out in the series. The next one's coming out next year, but I'm very excited to keep picking them up because it just seems like they're all going to be a good fun time. And lastly, in the fantasy category, I have to talk about A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. I know everybody's so tired of Sarah J. Maas, but I did not really discover her until this year. I've heard of her, I've seen the books, I know everyone was obsessed with her for all these years, but I just never forayed into exploring really any fantasy much before this year. This year was the year I kind of introduced myself to the fantasy genre again beyond what I read when I was like a teen, and I did a little bit of fantasy reading. But this is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. This one definitely, you need to read them in order. This would contain major spoilers if I talked about the plot of this one, so I'm not going to do that. I will just say it very much sucked me into this story. I was a sucker for this book. It's like 800 pages, but I read it so fast. I absolutely love the romance element in it. No matter how ridiculous and cheesy it may be, I am a sucker for this book, and that just has to be known. I can't talk about the year of 2021 without talking about this series in some way, and this has definitely been my standout favorite in the series so far. I'm currently reading the fourth book in the series, A Court of Silver Flames, which I know a lot of people also really love that one too. I'm not very far into it, so I don't know if it's going to top it and be a new fave or not yet, but to be determined. Maybe that will end up on my 2022 list. But this series still is ongoing, and I'm definitely going to keep reading them because they are just a fun time, and that cannot be denied. And next we can talk about my favorite romance books of the year. It'll be pretty brief because because I only have two. I don't read a ton of romance, and when I do, it's hard for me to really love it, but I had a couple standouts this year of a couple romance books that I really loved and still think about after reading them. The first one is People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This was one of the biggest hyped romance books of the year, and every year there's one or two romance books that really get hyped and people are really loving them, and those are the ones I'll typically pick up since I don't read as much romance, but they're usually pretty hit or miss for me. Like, I either love them or I just do not see what everyone else is seeing. The other book that was pretty hyped this year was The Love Hypothesis, which I didn't really enjoy as much, but People We Meet on Vacation, I absolutely adored this romance. This is one of my favorite romances I've ever read. I was super skeptical about it too because I read Beach Read last year and I did not like Beach Read by Emily Henry, but this one really just blew me away and I just loved it so much. In this story, you're following two friends, Poppy and Alex, and ever since college, they always go on a vacation together over the summers, and they've done this over 12 years, but when you begin in the story, it has been 2 years since they have last taken a trip together because something went wrong and you don't know what, but they just haven't been going on these trips. And Poppy's at a place in her life where she's pretty unhappy, and one of her friends asks her, when's the last time you felt happy? And she says, oh, you know, when I was on vacation with Alex a couple years ago, that was the last time I really felt truly happy. And so she reaches out to him and says, how about we try to go on another vacation again and restore our friendship? And the story follows them on that vacation together, but it also jumps back in time and shows you different vacations they've been on throughout the years as you're trying to piece together their friendship and what happened to make it go wrong, and then following them as they begin to develop a romance for each other. I just thought this book was so sweet and realistic and nice. I just really like a romance book where the characters feel like real, flawed people. Those are the ones that are most compelling to me, rather than some of the insta-love, super cheesy, over-the-top type romances. Those don't really usually work for me as well. I like ones where these feel like actual people that you can meet and know and that you can relate to and recognize yourself in, and I just adored Poppy and Alex. I loved their friendship. I loved watching them both grow on their own separate journeys and watching them grow together, and it's just so sweet, and I just love this one so much. It also had really great vacation vibes because there's so many different vacations throughout the story, so if you like a good vacation type romance, especially for the summertime, then I would definitely recommend this one for then. And then the other romance book I have to talk about, I just recently read. It was in my video where I read 3 new Christmas romances, but along the way I discovered this one isn't actually a Christmas romance despite the cover, and that is 8 Perfect Hours by Leah Lewis. This is definitely more of just a contemporary fiction romance story that happens to have a snowstorm element right at the beginning, and then from the rest of that it just follows these characters over the next year of their lives or so. So despite the super wintry cover, it's not necessarily a seasonal romance. You can really read this at any time of the year, but the premise behind this story is that these two characters get stuck on the road in a snowstorm. The woman's phone ends up dying and she takes care of her mother, and so she really needs to get in touch with her mom, and so she goes and taps on this stranger's window, asks if she can charge her phone in his car, and then they end up really hitting it off and they spend the next 8 hours together while they're stuck in that snowstorm, and then they just go their separate ways. But life keeps pulling them back together. They keep bumping into each other, and because of their situations and where they are, they're not immediately falling in love. It's a very slow journey of these characters that fate keeps pulling together, and they're just trying to kind of go about their lives and figure out why and solve a lot of their own problems at the same time. So I just really love this one. I just really enjoyed this story of serendipity and fate pulling people together. It's not realistic, it's a touch magical and over the top in that way, but the characters and the dilemmas they face and the journeys they're on in their own separate growth are very real and raw and like flawed people, and so I loved watching them come together over the course of the story. I especially just found this main female character super relatable, and when I find a character relatable, I'm probably going to enjoy the book, so that really helped me really feel attached to this one. She's definitely on a journey where she's realizing that her life is no longer in front of her. She should just be living it now, and I very much relate to that sort of realization, so I really enjoyed it, had a good time with it, really recommend it if you like contemporary fiction with romance, and don't let the cover fool you. You can read this at any time of the year. And then the last book I have to talk about is a literary fiction novel, so it's the only one I have in this category, so I saved it for the end. And I've talked this book to death over the years, so I feel like you know, we don't need to sit here and talk about it forever, but that is Migrations by Charlotte McConaghy. Absolutely my favorite book of the year. I love this book so much. In it, you're following a woman who is studying Arctic terns, a type of bird that are dying out, and they're getting ready to go on what is suspected to be their last migration. They have a very long flight pattern where they migrate during the seasons, and she wants to follow them because this is probably going to be their last one. I understand how boring that sounds, but just trust me, okay? Just trust me. Multiple people have picked this book up because of me, and then they say, wow, you're right. It sounded boring, but it was incredible. So if you have listened to me rant and rave about this book all year long and you still haven't picked it up, I promise you, it's worth it. You're gonna love it. It's so good. This main character goes on such a beautiful journey. The story is written so beautifully. It captures grief so well. It is so poetic and lyrical, and the atmosphere is amazing, and it is just literally the perfect book. I cannot recommend this book enough. I talk about it every chance I get, and it's the only literary fiction I have on my list this year. I really wasn't reading much literary fiction this year or really enjoying much literary fiction, but this one was the absolute standout, the absolute favorite, and I will not rest until I convince everyone to read this book. So that is it for me and all of my top 21 books of 2021. I rambled for way longer than I expected to, so if you're still here at this part of the video, thanks for sticking around. Also, just thanks for sticking around with my channel this year. It's been a really fun year. I started my channel in 2020, so 2021 is the first full year that I've had going through all the different seasons of BookTube, and I just had so much fun creating content, getting to know people, trying different things, reading different things. It's just been a super fun time, and I just love having this little hobby to do as well. So thanks for being here. You guys make this great, and I love getting to chat with you guys about what books you're reading, what you're loving, and when your opinions are very different from mine. It's just so nice to have that community aspect to a hobby that you're doing, so you're not just like doing it by yourself. I just love having that community built around me, and I really appreciate you all being here, and I can't wait to just see what we do in 2022. Let me know down in the comments below if any of the books I talked about were also books that you've read and loved, or if you didn't love them, let me know too. But also let me know what was your favorite book that you read this year, and if you can't pick one, just pick like your top 3 or something, because I know it's always really hard to just pick one. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!